Yeah, my name is, first off, Christine Commerce. I am the Communications Director for U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. And we are very excited to have with us today, we have Molly Gochman, who is the foundress of Red Sand Project, along with her colleague, Kristen Pratt. She's the operations manager of Red Sand Project. And we have a surprise guest. We have an intern. Would you like to introduce your intern?
Yes, I'd love to introduce Emma. So I first met Emma years ago at Vassar, and Vassar started something called the Red Sand Project Club. And so I was so honored when Emma actually filled out an application to become one of our interns, because I've known her, probably for 6 or 7 years, but only met her in these little tidbits. And I was able to speak at her high school toward the end of her senior year. And it means a lot that she's been familiar with the project for so long, and she was still enthusiastic about it. So Emma, I'd love to hear you say a few words.
Yeah, of course. So I found out about Red Sand Project a long time ago when I was like way early in high school, maybe my sophomore year. Then I decided to use Red Sand Project as my senior project because I felt so passionately about it. And now I'm going into my junior year of college, and I saw that Red Sand was having interns this summer, and I was like, I couldn't imagine doing anything else or being anywhere else. So I applied, and I'm so honored to be here. And this is actually my last week of my internship. So I'm really happy I get to be here today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Molly is an award-winning artist and activist who aims to bring together the collective experiences of many for understanding. She believes that connection and thoughtful participation can catalyze powerful change. Molly's desire to leverage her influence as an investor and an activist and as an artist led her to found Stardust, with the hopes of contributing to a more just and equitable world. So with Molly as a board member of the Freedom Fund, Children's Rights, Creative Time, and Mosaic Project, and was named one of New York's newest abolitionists by the New York State Anti-Trafficking Coalition. She holds a BFA in sculpture from Guilford College. So please join me in welcoming Molly. And she's going to share a little bit with us today about Red Sand Project and how art and human trafficking intersect.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Christine. And sorry to mention honor again, but I'm so honored to be here with Catholic sisters and people who support Catholic sisters. A little side note, when we were doing work going in on the border, for example, when children were being detained, the people who'd been there for years who were able to get in were all Catholic sisters. We're all Catholic charity organizations, because you've been doing this work the longest. And so anyone who starts on this work really stands on your shoulders. You continue and work in all these areas, right? Like, I started to realize there needed to be work done in the investment space and created an human trafficking for a public equity portfolio. And Catholic sisters were some of the first to sign on. Now over 300 have signed on, right? Like, Catholic sisters were already asking investment professionals about this. So you guys are way ahead of the game. So it means a lot that you're choosing to listen to me today. I really appreciate it. I've been watching and following you for a long time, as most of us have. So, so when I first got involved in human trafficking, it was because I read an article, and I was shocked by what I read. Couldn't sleep at night, was very disturbed. It's very visceral when you first learn about this. And I felt so naive that this was going on. I didn't know about it. And so it caused me to just rethink everything that I was doing in my life. And I started to reach out to organizations to see what I could do. And so I stopped making art for a while and just connected with organizations and survivors to see what I could do. And so I was volunteering in different ways, but every organization told me they needed help raising awareness. And Christine works in communications. I didn't even know what communications was, right? Like I'm still learning what communications is. But I was like, how do you do that? So I'm like, I know the people on the street with the clipboard, but I don't think I have that kind of courage to go out there. And so I started inviting people over to my apartment for panel discussions on various topics, usually human trafficking as it related to something else, right? So for example, if the Super Bowl was happening, I would host a Super Bowl party and talk about human trafficking at sporting events. Things like that. Like if there was something around food, I would talk about exploitation and trafficking in the food system. And I realized a lot of the same people were coming to these events and I wasn't reaching new audiences. And so I was asked to speak about my art at Art Basel Miami. I said, I'm not making art anymore. I'm just working on anti-human trafficking. I could do something if it's a project that will raise awareness about anti-human trafficking. They said, yes, we're open to that. So I said, okay, let me go talk to some people. So I had this idea and I reached out to different survivors I knew and organizations to see what they thought of the idea. And they really liked it. They were very supportive. One thing that we would talk about in the panel discussions was about how trafficking was hidden in plain sight. And to address it, you really need to address the vulnerabilities that lead to it. And so sidewalk cracks are all around us. And so this is something that is there and it's growing, right? And sometimes these cracks explode. And if there's an earthquake, if there's like some kind of serious climate event or a war or a famine, right? That's when, well, famine's different with sidewalk cracks, but you get like cracks that happen and they're immediate and they're bigger. But usually these cracks start with something small and then get larger over time. And so an example like with prevention work around human trafficking is when I was learning about it, eventually I learned that 2/3 of the kids sold for sex in the US have a history in the child welfare system. So I was saying, wow, if I address the child welfare system, right, you could do so much to prevent child sexual exploitation as it relates to trafficking. So I thought, these sidewalk cracks, because they're in plain sight, but we're just not paying attention to them. And they would be a good metaphor for populations that go overlooked, right? And that we're just like stepping right beside, but aren't really looking, examining, making a difference. And that I think is another thing, like when we think about modern day slavery, human trafficking, the numbers now are over 50 million people globally are trafficked. And you think there's nothing I can do. This is too big. You learn it's well over $150 billion industry. What can I do? And you feel helpless. Like you feel like there is nothing you can do to move that needle. And even I think people working in it feel like many of you probably on this call, like when you're doing your work day to day and you're sending your emails, you're getting someone to their doctor's appointment, you're doing this day-to-day work, you're trying to find a bed for a survivor, you're talking a survivor through some trauma. All of those things, you feel like you're not making a dent in that 50 million, but it's all of us doing those little actions. And so these grains of sand, the project involves taking red sand. And you take red sand and you put it in a sidewalk crack. And as you're doing it, you see yourself transforming something. So you're pouring the sand and you see that an act that you do can make a difference. And not only does it make a difference, it makes a transformational difference, right? And then when you step back and let's say you do the project, the installation with a number of other people, see, you might have covered a whole block, right? And so it's not something that any of us is responsible for alone. We're working together, and we're working together with people we will never meet. Well, we're working together with people we will never know of all over the world. And And so that was another service that I think Red Sand Project provided, was this connecting. And my work, so much of my work, when people ask me, are you a painter? Are you a sculptor? I think I'm identifying more nowadays with being a sculptor, but I would tell people in my 20s and 30s, depending on the time, that I was an experiential artist. I was creating experiences to aesthetize us. I think life numbs us, just the process of living, in order to get through things. Like I was with a friend last night, like devastated over something in her personal life, like when we just harden, right, over time. And we and it's hard to let in new information. And so it's something that we form to protect ourselves, and we need protection, but we also need this opportunity to soften and engage and connect more deeply with ourselves and more deeply with others. So my art is mostly like geared toward that and thinking about how to do that. And so Red Sand Project is really an invitation to connect, right? So you do the project, and then you connect with those who are doing the project with you. You connect with organizations in the community that you're working in, or you're doing the project in. It might be your school. You connect with your school. You talk to people at your school. You hear stories. Once you start talking about it, you'll hear stories. So you like build this web that just grows and grows and grows. And I realized when I first started doing the activations in a city, you had organizations coming to do the activation that had never met each other, but they were all working in the same city. And so just being there at this like impartial, place around art, gave people an opportunity to talk and connect and say, I really need beds. And the YMCA is saying, guess what? We have beds, not consistently, but this is how we have them. And making that contact where it's just a human to human contact, because that's all we are. Like just making that contact. And then, I can call on Christine from the YMCA. I can call on Jeannie or Marianne, like someone from Catholic Sisters, right? Like learning who are the people I can call on who are part of this network, and who are my peers in this struggle. And so learning that and connecting and coming together, and like whenever we come together, we build something stronger. I'm looking at the names on this call, and I think Fred, I don't want to speak out of turn, but most are females. And you look at who's actually being trafficked, and most are females. But I find that most people who kind of come to do this work end up being females. And one thing that I think females tend to do more of, female identifying people, is connecting. I'm working on planning my husband's 50th right now, and I realize I do these connecting things, like I'm planning when is camp? Who do I have to connect with? Things like that. So it's that connecting work, and valuing that connecting work, and valuing building those networks. So I'm digressing so much, but so the project started in Miami at Art Basel Miami, and it started because survivors and the organizations working most closely with them said, yes, we like this idea. And I did a call to action on the bags that I made for the first project, because when I first did it, I was just putting red sand in little Ziplocs and putting that inside a muslin bag and then stamping the bag on both sides. And I made little brochures that I folded and put in the bags. Oh, wait, Emma might be going to get one. And so on the back was a call to action to boycott Publix at the time, because the Coalition for Immokalee Workers was asking for a penny more per pound for the farm workers picking tomatoes. And there was just a couple holdout corporations who weren't willing to pay. And one of those at the time was Publix. So I know Publix does great work with UNICEF and has since signed on, but that was the call to action at the time. And who knows, maybe we helped them sign on. I don't know. But right before Miami, a documentary had come out called Food Chains. And in Food Chains, there was a group of men, there were 9 men who were like being trafficked, and they were locked inside a U-Haul at night. And over time, a crack had formed in the top of this U-Haul. And 2 of the men pushed through and got out and found that there was were other humans living about 4 blocks away. Like they were able to walk to freedom, I'll say. And through that, then they were able to connect, of course, get the other guys out. And eventually there was a case, to address what was going on in that little community in Florida, which was another Florida situation. And we were in Florida, so I felt it was appropriate to reference that as well. And so I started the project, and the idea was, I talked about being with the clipboard. And when I was in college, I thought I was going to be a human rights lawyer. And I realized at some point that my art, which I saw as this selfish thing at the time that I was just doing for myself, when I created these things, people came up to them and were able to bring themselves to it and ask questions for themselves. So rather than me going out and saying, look at the time I was doing graphs based on female genital mutilation, I was like, rather than saying, listen, you should talk to me about female genital mutilation, it was, look at these graphs. And they were sculptural, and they had keys, and people wanted to talk about it in a way that I felt was open. It was just like an opening to a conversation. Because when you do the project, you'll find that some, maybe most people will pass by it without stopping, right? And they might have a place they need to go. Like everyone has their reasons for why they stop and why they don't. And but there might be someone who actually has some time and is curious and wants to engage. And so that's your opportunity to have a conversation with a stranger about something that you care about. And I loved that. I loved that I could connect, because I have a friend who says she doesn't care about small talk, she only wants big talk. I'm like it's great when you can just start with someone on big talk, and you can connect with someone and you're already talking about something that you both care about. And it's not something where you're out there saying, I want to lecture you on this thing. It's just like, this is something I care about. Are you interested? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to hear what I've heard about it? And I want to hear what you've heard about it and how it's touched you. And so, so that's one thing that the project does. And through that, I've never advertised the project. So the project has just happened organically over time. So, survivors after Miami, because I'd reached out before Miami, they said, oh, can you send me a bag? And then they're like, oh, can you actually, I need a lot. I'm going to take this to the group home. There's the current bag. I'm going to take this. So it's far from my little burlap bags that I hand stamped in the beginning, because then I couldn't keep up. I couldn't keep up with the stamping, filling sand operation. And so it got bigger, because you find out you're not alone in caring about this. There's so many other people who care about this. And so, and we get calls and we're like, how did this person even find out about Red Sand Project? Even before this, you're like, how are you involved in Freedom United? And I'm like, I remember talking with them years ago. And then I went on their website. I was like, do they do anything with Red Sand Project? I was like, oh my goodness, they celebrate us in huge ways. And the person who I'd connected with is currently, I think, on their board of advisors or something, but he's no longer the executive director, right? How these organizations change. And so all these things that we do, right, leaving seeds in different places to allow things to blossom in the way that they'll blossom, given the sun and the rain that they'll get wherever they are. And so we don't know where these things will go. Probably like,
And yeah, and you bring up a good point, the connection piece. So I participated, for those who are not that familiar with the project, you know, you pour the red sand in the cracks of the sidewalk and so forth. And we're going to show a video here in a minute, which is a great video. But I always wondered, because you mentioned talking to people if they came up to you during the project. And so when I've participated in this project before, I always wondered, should we have signs up? Like, what are people going to know what this red sand means? So I'm just curious how other organizations or projects that you have participated in created that awareness or that connection between the red sand and the human trafficking awareness.
that's such a great question. Like I always say, this project isn't mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who's taken it on, and they have taken it on in their unique ways and made it their own. And so I love seeing how people have allowed it to speak louder, speak to different communities, or speak in their language. In that people have been used chalk a lot, right? To write on the sidewalk and explain like what their organization is, what their hashtag is, what our hashtag is. Some people make posters. People do different things to personalize it. And because it really can be personalized. It's for you to use in whatever way you think is meaningful and however you want to expand on it and make it your own. So I think going back to being an artist and coming into it, like sometimes art, like, I mean, we're all limited in different ways, but we want like this purity of visual image. And so I'm like, I'm just going to create this one visual image, and I'm not going to create this other stuff. And that'll be enough to get people just to question, but really it's not. It's just the beginning of the conversation. That's just one way to get people into the conversation. The beginning of the conversation might be that chalk, right? Or might be the flyer or postcard that you're handing out. But for example, with the land art installations, right? If people see those from above in a plane, they're just seeing a line, and they probably don't even realize that that line is the border between the US and Mexico, right? So for like, I've been doing these large scale land art installations for those of you attending the call that are in the shape of the US-Mexico border, but filled with red sand. And they're about, you know, this thick, and from up above, even with like a drone, it looks like someone wrote on the landscape. It's pretty cool.
You can go on your website and see the pictures.
Yes, yes. But like, how do you know, like you're flying over, like you don't know that's the border, most likely. And you definitely don't know what it's trying to raise awareness of. Like, how does that communicate? I think is kind of the unknown magic, right? Like we say, like that art, these things can affect us maybe without even having that much other information. I was somewhere recently and doing a visit, and it was this incredible studio. And I said, you know, is this okay? I want to take a picture of your sink. I know that sounds really weird. It was a stainless steel sink. And they're like, actually, that's really cool that you want to take a picture of the sink. There's a history to it. And I thought, she's making fun of me. She thinks I'm the most ridiculous person for taking a picture of her stainless steel work sink. And there was a history. It came from the country she came from. And it's the only thing that stayed with her. And she moved it into this glamorous new studio she built for her sculptures. And I was like, oh, you know, there's something sometimes that speaks to us that can speak to us without words. And I'm really interested in that. So I'm interested in just all the different ways that we can communicate. And that was really why I started using my art to deepen these conversations, because I realized that I needed to leverage whatever tools I had. And I love like accountants who work to address modern day slavery. Like that is so exciting. Like I love, you know, like, wow, this is, you know, tattoo artists, right? Who are looking at tattoos and saying, you know what, I can see this. Should I talk with her about this? Like flight attendants, people who are just leveraging what their knowledge is, what their connections are. You can leverage whatever you have. And so I think it was just, me learning that I could leverage my art, but other people are going to leverage what they have. And together with this connection of all of our different skills and our interests and our passion and our caring, we are making a difference. It's not just that we can, but we are.
Yeah, and I think we can all make a difference, especially with this project, because I know one of the components of this project is not only doing the project and having that awareness there at the time, but then you encourage people to take pictures of it, right? Not just you have the pictures of the sink, but then you can also take pictures of the red art and post it on social media with a message, right?
Exactly.
And so with that, because we are at 1:30 and I want to allow some time for questions, I do want to share the video that you sent us because it is such an amazing video. And I think this will give people a little bit better idea about the Red Sand Project.
There are over 50 million people being trafficked or living in modern slavery today. The industry is over $150 billion. This is beyond me. I can't comprehend those numbers. Slavery occurs in every industry. Farming, mining, domestic work. It touches almost everything we put on our bodies and almost everything we put in our bodies. We consume slavery. When I first heard about modern slavery, I was waiting for my friend and reading the New York Times. You're reading about what's happening to these women in these training camps, and you start to imagine what the smell is. You start to imagine how your skin would feel. I felt completely absorbed by it. I wanted to leverage everything I had. I was asked to speak about my art at Art Basel Miami, and I said, I'm not making art right now. I am just working on anti-human trafficking work. But if I could do a project that allowed me to raise awareness, then I'm in. What felt really comfortable for me was doing something that put me in an odd position because I look silly on the street putting sand in a sidewalk crack. Red Sand Project is a participatory art project that allows people to raise awareness about vulnerabilities that lead to exploitation. The idea is that these vulnerabilities that lead to exploitation exist all around us. It allows you to take this material and put it in a sidewalk crack, and therefore you see yourself in that process and you realize there's something that you can do. Red Sand Project is used by organizations. It's used by schools, individuals wanting to make a difference in their communities. Art allows us to pause and open. We require working together. We require using this shared space of Red Sand Project to come together and build something that's bigger to combat these numbers. Because this is something that is caused by humans, and humans can fix it.
Okay. So that was such a great video, and I think it does such a good job of illustrating what the Red Sand Project and how it works and people participating. And as I mentioned, this was something I first got involved with a few years ago in Central Florida. So I worked with the Seminole County and Central Florida Human Trafficking Task Force. And one of the ways that we also helped spread awareness with this was we invited media. So we got some great press coverage. So we were meeting and engaging the people and the local officials and law enforcement and all these other organizations. but then we engaged the general public by reaching out to them in their living rooms, right? Because if it was on the news, then we were reaching that many more people. So just another idea of another way to get that message out there. So I would like to open it up for questions right now. If you could put your questions in the Q&A, we would love to hear from you. And if you have any specific questions, we've got one here from Cindy Decker. How can someone set up an outreach with the Red Sand Project? I would like to speak further, would be in Northern New Jersey. So
on Molly.
Yeah, I'd love for you to answer, Kristen.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen, Operations Manager here at Red Sand Project. And thank you so much for having Molly today. It's an honor to be with you. Cindy, I'd love to talk with you. I don't know if you're able to share your email address, or I can give you mine, but we could connect on email and I could talk you through the process. You could also just go to our website, redsandproject.org, and you can order right there. The sand is free. We just ask that you pay for shipping. Unless shipping is a hardship in any way, then we will cover that cost. And when we send you the sand, we're going to send you a list of, we have this really cool info sheet that gives you instructions, but then also has a bunch of thought prompts and conversation starters that you can use with the participants at your Red Sand Project action to get them thinking and talking about this issue in a way that might feel relevant for them. So my email is, you can email us at info@redsandproject.org, or Cindy, I got it. I got your email, Cindy. I'm going to send you a note right after this call.
and
And I just
then,
answered something. I typed an answer to Bill, but it disappeared for me. So what is an activation? I consider an activation anytime that Red Sand Project is being used in public. So taking the sand and putting it in a sidewalk crack, or you might create a material that's similar to sand or something red and using that. It's just taking action.
why did you choose red? Was there a certain meaning or purpose behind the color?
I really liked the power of red against sidewalk colors. And you realize, like, sidewalk colors, you think they're just gray and shades of gray, but when you travel, like when I first went to Miami, a lot of the sidewalks are pink because of the materials that are there that they're using in their mixture. And some sidewalks are more blue, but the red contrast really shows up. And also they were doing a shout out to the tomatoes. And I didn't know, I had a hope, right? Because I knew there was a gap with organizations connecting with one another. I knew I would get calls and say, like, I'm in Kentucky. Do you know anyone in Kentucky working on this? And I'm like, there are so many gaps and no one's in one central location working on this. And I think Freedom United was also working on that same thing, like these gaps to connect the spaces and connect people. And so you also think about red thread, right? Like a red thread that ties everything together. The color of the tomatoes was red. Some people think it's, the color of like life and blood. And I don't think of it as anything gory, but and red culturally speaks differently, right? There were groups in Haiti who really wanted to use the project, but because red symbolizes death there in some cultures, it wasn't appropriate. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I'm just going to mention real quick, if you're not that familiar with, because I know Molly keeps mentioning the issue with the tomatoes, we actually did a webinar called Slavery in Our Tomatoes that addressed this very issue. So if you want to learn more about that issue, you can visit our YouTube channel, U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, and check out our webinar, Slavery in Our Tomatoes. It's really eye-opening. I live in Florida, and I had really no idea. We think so many times that slavery is happening overseas, labor trafficking. We think of, that little boy making the rug in India or something, and we don't realize it's actually happening here in our fields, in our agricultural communities, and in so many ways, like as your video said. So we don't have any more questions from the audience at this point, but what would you say, what are some tips? What would you say is a successful event? Can you describe some of the more successful events that you have seen with this project?
I would love for Kristen to respond to that, because my response would be like, any time that someone, like you wouldn't even have to do it with other people. We feel like it is more successful usually when people do it in community. But I think anytime that you do something where you feel like you've made a difference, and so if you could do it alone and feel like you changed something, I feel like we need that sometimes to feel like we matter and our actions actually matter and make a difference. So my perspective on what is success is pretty large. But there are some that are really pronounced and have a much higher volume and reach much more people. So Kristen, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm curious about how we would define success here. It can be so many different things, but I'm really moved, and I'm sure Emma can agree, because we've attended some actions together this summer. It's when, even if just one person is engaged and has questions and goes a little bit deeper, asks a deeper question, you can see the connections happening there. Or if a strangers stop by all the time and they want to know what's going on, and they'll share a personal story of how trafficking has impacted them or their community. And then we're able to engage with them, and often they will pour red sand with us. So those little moments of engagement, even if it's just one person in an action, that feels like success to me, because you never know what's going to happen beyond that, what this person will share with another and with another. It's like all the grains of sand coming together in the crack.
Yeah, you start a conversation that's hard to start. Sorry, Chrissy, I hosted my family reunion last weekend, and a cousin who I hadn't met because he hadn't been to a reunion in 30 years. He came with his wife, and she at one point pulled me aside and said, so the reason we came up from Florida is because 2 of my granddaughters were trafficked. And I found out about Red Sand Project and realized my cousin was one of the creators, and I really wanted to thank you in person. And she told me about their history and what happened to them. And you realize it's so close, because you're connecting on a human to human relationship.
Exactly. And I know, I feel like I'm always kind of surprised. We would have tabling at the events we did too, where we would hand out information about human trafficking, further creating that awareness and education. So sometimes we would have different handouts, and different groups may bring a table and hand out information, but engaging people with conversation. I know when I've been on college campuses or talking with college students, and maybe Emma can share any of her experiences, but you start that conversation, and they'll start telling you stories. Yeah, there was this one time, and there was this one situation, and I think it might have been a human trafficking situation, or my friend was put in this human trafficking situation. And it's really amazing to me how many people that we don't realize is really touched by this issue. Emma, what has your been experience in working with some of the college students on this project?
So I haven't, since officially being on the Red Sand team, I haven't been back to college because I'm on a summer break, but I did have sort of an experience when I brought it to my high school my senior year for my senior project. It was just very cool to be able to educate my peers about the topic, because a lot of them had really never heard about it before. And I think I was almost surprised that I had a pretty large turnout. I did the activation, and I also had a separate presentation. And I remember there was probably not as many people I wanted at the activation, but people that went then told their friends about it. And when I gave my final presentation about it and showed pictures from the event, I want to say there was double the amount of people there, which was really, really cool and very supportive.
Great. Well, we only have a minute or two left. So at this point, can you just share a little bit about what types of groups would be good to get involved with this event? How can they get involved? If you can give your website one more time, and what are your future goals for the project?
Well, one goal would be for people to make their own materials so that it doesn't have to be the physical red sand coming from us. So people can create their own material to use to fill the cracks. And I think, I'm just letting it run and letting people make it what it will become, because I love what participants have made out of it so far. So I don't have like this clear thing I want to reach. Like I never dreamed that we would, be in all 50 states within 2 years, and that the Department of Health in Tennessee would want to do it twice, and that we'd have like the Los Angeles County School District wanting to do it at all their schools, right, Kristen? Like I never dreamed of that. Like we had to cut it off internationally, right? I think I did fantasize. Yes, I fantasized, but I realized I thought those weren't realistic fantasies, and so we did have it going overseas, and we had it in over 70 countries. And then I said, I can't sustain this. So I think a goal would be creating a recipe so that people could do it in their own country. There are also countries that we've sent it and it's gotten held up in customs for different reasons. And so like there's freedom of speech issues around this that I'd love for people to have more autonomy in being able to create it themselves without having to rely on shipping from us. And as far as groups, my daughter started doing it at 2 or 3, and I think all ages. It can be school groups. There's been a lot of Indigenous communities doing Red Sand Project, and I think it's at 40% of people trafficked for sex in the US or come from Indigenous communities. Kristen, is that correct? It's around that. We don't have clear numbers, but we're doing a lot of work with missing and murdered Indigenous people. And we have a documentary coming out called We Ride for Her that will be deepening conversations around that.
Yeah, so I think it's really a great project for any group, church groups, any type of group, to get together, help raise this awareness. Give your website one more time, please, if you can.
redsandproject.org, all one word.
Yes, check it out. And I know one of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk about today, but because we're out of time, but one of the things you do mention on your website is human trafficking and migration, and the tie-in with that, with this project. And I just want to mention something real quick, because we have World Day Against Trafficking in Persons coming up on July 30th. And this is an issue that U.S. Catholic Sisters is working with the Good Shepherd National Advocacy, Good Shepherd Sisters National Advocacy Center. And we're working on that project. So you can find out more information about that issue at sistersagainsttrafficking.org. And then also, I'd like to just mention real quickly, if you go on our website as well, you can find out information about our upcoming Human Trafficking Conference, September 28th through 30th, which will be in Chicago this year. So if you're really interested in learning more about human trafficking, that's an excellent way to come out and hear some excellent speakers and learn more about this issue. Thank you so much, Kristen and Emma and Molly, for your time sharing about this really innovative project that you've created that's really taken a national focus to this human trafficking issue. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you have any questions about the Red Sand Project, you can go on their website. Kristen, I'm sure will get back with you on any questions that you may have. And you can also contact Sisters Against Trafficking if you have any further questions for us. Thank you so much and have a great day, everyone.